It's a little after 7:30 on a Sunday evening here in Chicago. From my office on the 52nd floor of the Sterling Tower, the city unfolds below me like a glittering circuit board, the last rays of the August sun catching on the steel and glass of 100 other giants. It's quiet now, the frantic energy of the workday replaced by a deep, humming peace. My building, my design. My name is on the dedication plaque in the lobby. But sometimes, when the light hits it just right, I remember a time when this tower was just a dream on my screen, a dream someone else was trying to steal. I remember the woman I used to be, the one who thought that if you just worked hard enough and kept your head down, your talent would eventually speak for itself. I was wrong. Talent doesn't speak. It has to be forced to scream. 2 years ago, I wasn't here. I was 20 floors down and 3 blocks east, a junior architect at Advanced Designs, a boutique firm with a big name and a bigger secret. The name was Arthur Vance, a man who had been a titan of Chicago architecture in the 90s but was now just a well-dressed ghost coasting on fumes. The secret was me. I was the one doing the real work. I was the ghost in his machine. Our office was a temple of minimalist design, white walls, concrete floors, furniture that was beautiful to look at and painful to sit in. It was a space designed to project an image of cutting-edge creativity, but it always felt like a museum to me, cold and silent. I worked in the open-plan studio with the other junior designers, but my real life happened after they all went home. My nights were a quiet communion with the soul of the city. I'd stay until midnight, fueled by lukewarm coffee from a machine. That sounded like it was dying, my screen the only point of light in the cavernous space. I'd sketch, I'd draft, I'd lose myself in the complex, beautiful mathematics of creating a space for people to live or work in. I loved the work, I loved the city. And I thought that was enough. The Sterling Tower project was my baby. It was the biggest contract Vance Designs had landed in a decade, a chance to put a new iconic silhouette on the Chicago skyline. The client, Julian Croft of the Sterling Group, was a legend, a ruthless, visionary developer who didn't just build buildings. He built landmarks. For 6 months, I had poured every ounce of my being into the design. Arthur had given me the brief with a wave of his hand. Something bold, Maya, something iconic. You know what to do? And had then promptly left for a 2-week vacation in Tuscany. I didn't just design a glass box. I designed a living, breathing thing. A tower that twisted subtly as it rose, its form calculated to mitigate the brutal force of the Lake Michigan wind. I designed a double helix exoskeleton, a visible steel lattice that was both a structural necessity and a stunning sculptural element. I integrated a series of terraced sky gardens, creating green space in the clouds, and clad the entire building in a new photovoltaic glass that could generate a portion of its own power. It was ambitious, it was beautiful, and it was mine. When Arthur returned, tanned and rested, he'd walk to my desk, looked over my renderings and my meticulously built scale model and nodded slowly. Good, he said, a word he dispensed. Like a miser parting with a copper coin. A very solid starting point. I see you've incorporated that helix idea we discussed. We had never discussed a helix idea. The idea had come to me at 3 in the morning, after I'd fallen down a rabbit hole of research into biomimicry. But I just nodded. Yes, Arthur. I'll take it from here, he'd said, gathering my sketches. I'll add the Vance touch, the vision. The Vance touch consisted of him taking my digital files, adding his name to the title block, and then presenting the work to the client as his own. I had told myself this was how the industry worked. I was the junior. He was the principal. I was paying my dues. It was a lie I had to repeat to myself every morning just to get out of bed. The day of the big presentation to Julian Croft and his executive team was the culmination of those 6 months of work. The conference room at our firm was prepped like a stage. The centerpiece was my architectural model, a beautiful, intricate thing of acrylic and miniature trees that I had spent 50 hours building by hand. The large screen behind it was set to display the renderings I had spent 100 more hours perfecting. Arthur strode in, looking impeccable in a custom suit, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. He was a master performer. I was there too, standing awkwardly to the side, my role officially designated as technical support. I was there to run the slideshow and answer any pesky, detail-oriented questions that were beneath his station. Julian Croft was an intimidating presence. He was in his late 60s with a sharp, hawk-like face and eyes that seemed to see right through you. He exuded an aura of immense power and absolute impatience. He nodded curtly as he entered, his team of VPs trailing behind him, and got straight to business. Arthur, show me what you've got. For the next 45 minutes, Arthur performed. He walked the clients through my design with the passion and flair of a seasoned orator. He spoke of his vision for a tower that breathed with the city. He used phrases I had written in my design statement. He pointed to the double helix exoskeleton on the model and called it my signature solution to the lateral load problem. He was magnificent. He was a fraud. I just stood there, my face a polite, neutral mask, clicking to the next slide whenever he gave me a subtle nod. I felt a familiar, hot wave of shame and frustration wash over me. I was a ghost at the christening of my own child. Toward the end of the presentation, as Arthur was waxing poetic about the sky gardens, I saw a small potential issue. On the projected budget, the cost for the photovoltaic glass was slightly underestimated. It was a minor point, but an important one for a client like Croft. I saw an opportunity, a small chance to assert my presence, to show I was more than a glorified slide clicker. I took a half step forward. Arthur, if I may add a quick note on the glazing costs. Arthur stopped mid-sentence. He turned to me, not with anger, but with a slow, deeply patronizing smile that was somehow infinitely worse. He let out a soft, paternal chuckle.
He turned back to the room, to the powerful men in their expensive suits. "Forgive the interruption,"
he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "This is Ms. Lin, one of our brightest young technicians. So eager." He then looked at me, his smile still fixed in place. "Thank you, Maya. That's quite all right. Miss Lin is here to take notes for us and handle the technicals. I'll handle the vision." The humiliation was a physical blow. It was a public neutering. He had dismissed me, my expertise, my contribution, and relegated me to the role of a secretary in front of the most important client of my career. I felt my face flush, a hot, prickling wave of red. I shrank back to my place by the wall, my eyes burning a hole in the carpet. But then something unexpected happened. One of Croft's senior VPs, a sharp-looking man with an engineering pin on his lapel, leaned forward. "Actually, speaking of technicals," he said, looking at the complex model, "that exoskeleton is a fascinating design. What grade of steel? Are you specifying for the lower-level nodes to handle the tensile stress? Especially with that cantilevered garden on the 16th floor?" The room went quiet. Arthur, who was in the middle of taking a sip of water, froze. I could see the panic flash in his eyes. He didn't know the answer.
He knew the broad strokes, the vision, but he hadn't bothered to learn the complex engineering.
That made it all possible. That was my job. Well, that's a detail we are still finalizing with our structural engineers. Arthur stammered, trying to bluff his way through it with a dismissive wave of his hand. It will, of course, be the highest possible grade. It was a weak, evasive answer, and everyone in the room knew it. The VP looked unsatisfied. The air grew tense. Then, Julian Croft, who had been silent for most of the presentation, spoke for the first time. He did not look at Arthur. He turned his head and looked directly at me, the ghost by the wall. "Miss Lin," he said, his voice a low, commanding baritone. "You are in charge of the technicals. Can you answer the man's question?" Every head in the room turned to me. Arthur shot me a look that was a mixture of fury and desperation. This was my moment. My heart was pounding, but my mind was suddenly blessedly clear. This was my world, the numbers, the physics, the reality of the building. "Of course, Mr. Croft," I said, my voice steady and clear. A stark contrast to Arthur's blustering. "We are specifying a 992 grade 50 steel for the primary lattice. But for the 16 load-bearing nodes on the lower third of the structure, I've actually sourced a new carbon steel alloy from a German manufacturer. It offers a 20% higher tensile strength at a comparable cost, which allows us to achieve the aesthetic thinness of the helix without compromising structural integrity. It's the key to making the whole design financially and physically viable. I finished, my explanation hanging in the silent room. I had not just answered the question. I had demonstrated a total, bottom-to-top mastery of the project that Arthur had just claimed as his own vision. The VP who had asked the question nodded slowly, visibly impressed. Arthur just stood there, a frozen, sickly smile on his face, and Julian Croft, he just looked at me. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were sharp, analytical.
He was not just looking at a junior architect anymore.
He was looking at the person who had actually designed his building. He held my gaze for a long moment, then turned back to Arthur. Very impressive, he said, his voice flat. It was impossible to know if he was talking about the design or about me. The meeting ended soon after. As the clients filed out, Croft paused as he passed me. He didn't say a word. He just gave me a quick, almost imperceptible nod. It was nothing. And it was everything. Later, as I was clearing the conference room, Arthur cornered me. What the hell was that? He hissed, his face red with fury. You made me look like a fool in there. Your job is to make me look good, not to show off. You didn't know the answer, Arthur, I said, my voice quiet. Your job, he said, his finger jabbing the air in front of my face, is to do your job. And your job is to stay quiet unless you are spoken to. Do you understand me? Yes, Arthur, I said, my spirit finally cracking. I retreated to my desk, my small victory now tasting like ash in my mouth. I looked out the window at the incredible, defiant skyline of the city, a landscape built by architects who had not, I imagined, been told to just take notes. I felt trapped, humiliated, but as I remembered that small, silent nod from Julian Croft, I felt something else too. A tiny, dangerous flicker of hope. It is a quiet Sunday evening, and from my window I can see the lights of the city begin to sparkle as dusk settles in. The Chicago skyline is a testament to ambition, a collection of giants clawing their way to the heavens. There is a brutal honesty to it. A building cannot lie about its foundations. It is either strong or it will fall. I learned that the hard way. Not from a textbook, but from the slow, sickening erosion of my own spirit in the weeks that followed that first, fateful presentation. A person's character, I discovered, also has a foundation. And my boss, Arthur Vance, was built on sand. The small nod from Julian Croft had been a dangerous thing. It had planted a tiny, rebellious seed of hope in the barren soil of my professional life. I found myself working on the Sterling Tower with a renewed, almost defiant sense of purpose. This was my design. My name may not have been on the door, but my DNA was in every line of the blueprints, every calculation, every choice of material. Arthur, however, seemed to have sensed the subtle shift in the dynamic. He must have seen the flicker of respect in Croft's eyes, and it terrified him. His behavior towards me in the following weeks became a toxic cocktail of increased dependency and escalating resentment. He needed my mind, my skills, more than ever as the project moved into its complex technical phases, but he hated me for it. He began to micromanage me with a suffocating intensity. He would stand over my shoulder as I worked, questioning every decision. Are you sure about that setback on the 40th floor, Maya? He would ask, his tone dripping with doubt. It seems pedestrian. It's required to balance the structural load from the cantilevered garden on the opposite side, Arthur, I would reply, my voice a flat monotone. It's in the engineering report you signed off on. He would simply grunt and walk away, only to present the very same design feature in a memo to the client an hour later as my solution to the complex load balancing issue.
He was a magpie, building his nest with the shiny things I created, and I was growing tired of foraging for him.
The first real crack in the foundation appeared a month into the preliminary site work. The contractors had begun drilling and pouring the deep, concrete foundation piles that would anchor the tower to the bedrock far below. My actual job, was to review the daily surveyor reports, the rebar placement logs, and the concrete slump test results, cross-referencing everything with my master blueprints to ensure a perfect execution. It was tedious, meticulous work. And I was very, very good at it. On a Tuesday afternoon, I found it. A discrepancy. A surveyor's report showed the placement grid for a cluster of 4 critical foundation piles on the building's north side was off. It was a small deviation, a matter of inches, but on a project of this scale, an error of inches at the bottom could cascade into a catastrophic error of feet at the top. It could compromise the integrity of the entire double helix exoskeleton, the very soul of my design. I did my job. I did what any competent architect would do. I highlighted the discrepancy, attached the relevant blueprint sections, and wrote a clear, concise, and professional email. To Arthur Vance, subject, urgent, discrepancy in foundation, tile placement, Sterling Tower site. Arthur, please be advised that today's surveyor report, see attached, shows a significant deviation in the placement of piles N12 through N15. This is in direct conflict with the approved foundational blueprint, sheet A102. I recommend we issue an immediate stop work order for that sector until the contractor can rectify the placement. Please advise on how you'd like to proceed. Best, Maya Lin sent the email, creating a clear digital paper trail. An hour later, his reply came. It was, as always, curt and dismissive. Subject, urgentive, spoken to the foreman. He assures me it's within acceptable tolerance for a project of this scale. Don't create problems where there are none. Maya, let the men on the ground do their jobs. He hadn't even looked at the report. He had made a phone call, accepted the word of a foreman who was trying to avoid a costly delay, and dismissed my documented, evidence-based concern. He was more interested in maintaining a smooth, untroubled process than in getting it right. I saved a copy of the entire email chain to a private, secure folder. A habit I had developed long ago. A week later, the crack became a chasm. An independent engineering inspector, hired by the Sterling Group as part of their standard due diligence, flagged the exact same issue. But now, another week's worth of concrete had been poured around the misplaced piles. The problem had gone from a minor headache to a multi-million-dollar migraine. It would mean drilling out the incorrect piles, a costly and time-consuming process that would set the project back by at least a month. Julian Croft was, to put it mildly, furious. An emergency conference call was scheduled for the following morning. Just Arthur, myself, and the entire executive team from the Sterling Group. The conference room felt like a walk-in freezer the next morning. Arthur was pacing back and forth, his face a pale, sweaty mask of anxiety. He had been yelling at me all morning, a desperate, frantic attempt to preemptively shift the blame. How could you let this happen, Maya? I put you in charge of the technicals. You were supposed to be watching them. He was conveniently ignoring the email in which he had explicitly told me to stand down. I have the email right here, Arthur, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. The one where I flagged this a week ago. The one where you told me not to create problems. He just glared at me, his jaw working silently. The speakerphone on the center of the table crackled to life, and the blood seemed to drain from his face. Arthur, you there? The voice was Julian Croft's. It was not happy, Julian. Yes, good morning, Arthur said, his voice a strained, false baritone. A terrible business, this. Simply terrible. I am as appalled as you are. Save the platitudes, Arthur. Croft's voice cut through the speaker like a shard of ice. My engineer is telling me that this is a 7-figure mistake that is going to delay my flagship project by at least a month. He tells me it's a fundamental error in oversight. What I want to know in very simple terms is how your firm, which I am paying a fortune to, missed this. This was it, the moment of truth. Arthur had a choice. He could be a leader. He could take responsibility, admit he overruled a junior's correct assessment, and propose a solution. Or he could be what he had always been, a coward. He chose to be a coward. Julian, Arthur began, his voice taking on a tone of deep, pained regret. Frankly, this is an unacceptable failure, and I am as furious as you are. It seems to be a significant and deeply embarrassing oversight at the junior level. He paused, and I could feel his eyes on me, even though I was staring at the table. Ms. Lin, my junior architect, is responsible for the day-to-day review of the contractor reports. I can only assume, in my professional bewilderment, that she failed to flag the deviation to me in a timely or effective manner. My head snapped up. I stared at him, my mouth falling open in sheer, unadulterated shock. He was lying. He was lying so brazenly, so completely, it took my breath away, but he wasn't done. He was on a roll, performing for his audience of one. He was throwing me under a bus that was the size of a skyscraper. I put my trust in my team. Julian, he continued, his voice now a performance of wounded authority. Perhaps that was my mistake. I empower my people. But it is clear that, in this case, that trust was misplaced. Maya, are you on this call? He asked, as if he didn't know I was sitting 3 feet away from him. I couldn't speak. My throat had closed up. I was frozen in a state of pure, horrified disbelief. Maya, he said again, his voice now sharp, demanding. Can you please explain to Mr. Croft and his team why you failed to do your job? This is the kind of rookie mistake that jeopardizes entire projects. This is not the standard of excellence we uphold at Advanced Designs. It is simply unacceptable. He had done it. He had publicly, in front of the most powerful developer in the city, declared me incompetent, negligent, and solely responsible for a multi-million-dollar error. He had not just thrown me under the bus. He had reversed the bus and driven over me again for good measure. I sat there, paralyzed. I could defend myself. I could scream that I had the email, that he was the one who had ignored my warning. But what would that accomplish? It would be my word, the word of a rookie, against his, the word of the great Arthur Vance. It would be a messy, public battle that would get me fired and blacklisted from every firm in Chicago. To stay silent was to accept the blame. To speak was to commit professional suicide. He had checkmated me, so I said nothing. I just sat there, the silence from my end of the phone a damning admission of guilt. The call ended with Croft saying, his voice a low, cold growl, that he was putting an immediate hold on all payments, and that his team would be conducting a full review of our firm's oversight procedures. Don't call me, he'd said. I'll call you. Then the line went dead. Arthur slammed his hand on the table. He stood up, glaring at me, his face a mask of pure reptilian fury. You better fix this, he hissed. Then he turned and stormed out of the conference room, leaving me alone in the deafening silence. I sat there for what felt like an hour, staring at the speakerphone as if it were a venomous snake. I felt broken. My career, my reputation, the future I had worked so hard for, it all felt like it had been incinerated in that single, brutal conference call. Then my personal cell phone, sitting on the table beside me, buzzed. It was an email. The sender was the senior VP from the Sterling Group, the engineer who had been on the call. The subject line was simple, today's call. I opened it with a trembling finger. The message was only 9 words long. That was undeserved. Your work is excellent. Keep your head up. I stared at those words, at that small digital lifeline thrown to me in the middle of a vast, drowning sea of despair. He had seen it. He had seen through Arthur's performance. They knew, or at least.
He did that. It wasn't a job offer. It wasn't a promise.
But it was a confirmation. A confirmation that I was not crazy, that I was not incompetent, and that the truth, however buried, had a way of being seen. A tiny rebellious seed of hope began to sprout once again in the ruins of my professional life. And I knew with a sudden, strange clarity that my time as a ghost architect was coming to an end. It is a quiet Sunday evening. From my window, I watched the endless river of headlights on Lakeshore Drive. Each one a small, self-contained world, a story moving through the city. It's funny how a life's entire trajectory can change in a single moment, in a single conversation. A week of professional purgatory can end with a single email. A life of being undervalued can be redefined by a single offer. I remember the week after that disastrous conference call. It was the lowest point of my career. I felt like a ghost, haunting the halls of my own professional life. I had no idea I was about to be offered a resurrection. The week following my public humiliation was a masterclass in passive aggression. The Sterling Tower project was on an indefinite hold, a great looming question mark that paralyzed our entire office. Arthur, having successfully scapegoated me, now treated me with a cold, contemptuous silence. I was a problem he had solved, and he clearly wished I would just disappear. He took me off all client-facing work and assigned me to the architectural equivalent of a Siberian salt mine, reviewing decades-old building codes for a potential zoning variance on a project that would likely never get built. It was tedious, soul-crushing work designed to punish me, to remind me of my place. I was no longer the brilliant designer of the firm's flagship project. I was the disgraced junior, relegated to the archives. My colleagues, who had once looked at me with a mixture of respect and envy, now barely met my eyes. They saw me as damaged goods, the girl who had almost sunk the firm's biggest contract. They didn't know the truth, and I was in no position to tell it. To defend myself would be to openly accuse Arthur of lying, an act that would have me fired and blacklisted before I could even update my resume. So I endured. I sat at my desk in the open plan office, feeling the weight of their pity and suspicion. And I did the soul-crushing work in the evenings. I would go home to my small apartment in Lincoln Park and scour job listings, my heart a heavy stone in my chest. Who would hire me? The story of the Sterling Towers foundation error was already making the rounds in the tight-knit Chicago architecture community. The official narrative, the one spun by Arthur, was that it was the mistake of a junior architect. My name wasn't mentioned, but it didn't have to be. I was tainted. I sent out a dozen applications and received only 2 automated rejections. The silence from the other 10 was even worse. I was at the bottom of a deep, dark hole, and I was beginning to believe there was no way out. The email arrived on a Friday afternoon, exactly 1 week after the conference call. It was not from a human resources department or an automated job site. The sender was j.croft@sterlinggroup.com, Julian Croft. My blood ran cold. This was it. The official termination notice. He was probably emailing me personally to fire me. A final brutal nail in my professional coffin. My hand was trembling as I clicked it open. The subject line was a single, ominous word: meeting. The body of the email was just as brief, direct, and terrifying. Miss Lin, I would like to request a brief, off-the-record meeting with you to discuss the Sterling Tower project. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. The lobby cafe at the Langham. Please confirm your attendance. Julian Croft. It wasn't a request. It was a summons. I stared at the words, my mind racing. Why would he want to meet me? The junior architect his firm was about to fire for incompetence. Was this some kind of legal trap? Was he going to demand a personal confession to use as ammunition in a lawsuit against Vance Designs? Every instinct screamed at me to decline, to hide, to avoid the final personal humiliation. But then I thought of the email from his senior VP, keep your head up. And I thought of the alternative, to stay here, in this professional purgatory, slowly suffocating under the weight of Arthur's lie. What did I have left to lose? My reputation was already in tatters, my job was a dead end. I had nothing. Which, in a strange way, meant I was free. I took a deep breath and typed my reply. Mr. Croft, I will be there. Maya Lin. The next morning, it was raining. A cold, gray drizzle that matched the state of my soul. The Langham was a world of hushed, expensive elegance, a place I had only ever seen in magazines. I felt small and out of place in my simple black raincoat as I walked into the lobby cafe. I chose a small, discreet table in the corner and ordered a black coffee I didn't want. He arrived at exactly 10 o'clock. He was alone. He wore a perfectly tailored gray suit, but he had forgone a tie, and he moved with an energy that seemed to command the space around him.
He saw me, gave a brief nod, and sat down opposite me. Miss Lin, he said, his voice the same low, commanding baritone I
remembered from the presentation. Thank you for coming. I appreciate your discretion. Mr. Croft, I replied, my own voice surprisingly steady. I have to admit, I'm not sure why I'm here. He gave a small, wry smile. Let's not waste each other's time with pleasantries, shall we? We're both busy people. He leaned forward slightly, his sharp, intelligent eyes fixed on me. I've been in this business for 40 years, Miss Lin. I have built over 100 buildings. In that time, I have learned that there are two kinds of architects in this world. There are the ones who can sell a building, and there are the ones who can design one. It is a vanishingly rare thing to find one who can do both. Arthur Vance can sell. He is a master salesman, but he cannot design. Not anymore. I just stared at him, my heart beginning to pound. That design for my tower, he continued, his voice low and intense. The helix, the sky gardens, the photovoltaic glass. That was not Arthur's work. That was the work of a true architect. That was your work. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. I just nodded, unable to speak. I knew it in that first presentation, he said. When Arthur couldn't answer a simple engineering question about his own vision, and you could... He paused. After that conference call last week, I had my legal team execute a clause in our contract that gives us access to all internal project communications. I spent my Tuesday evening reading the entire email chain between you and your boss regarding the foundation piles. The email where you clearly and professionally flagged the deviation. And the email where he, in no uncertain terms, told you to ignore it. A wave of dizziness washed over me. The truth.
He knew the truth. Arthur Vance is a liar, Croft said, his voice cold as steel.
And he is a coward. He tried to sacrifice your career to cover his own incompetence. In my world, there is no greater sin. My partnership with Vance Designs is over. My lawyers are drafting the termination letter as we speak. I felt a profound, shuddering sense of vindication. It was so intense I felt tears welling up in my eyes, and I had to look down at my coffee cup to hide them. Now, he said, his tone shifting from prosecutorial to constructive. That leaves me with a problem. I have a billion-dollar project without a lead architect. But more than that, I have a long-term strategic issue. I am tired of dealing with prima donna architects, with insecure artists and their massive egos. I am in the business of building, and I want to bring the vision for that building in-house. He looked directly at me. I am creating a new division. Within the Sterling Group, an in-house design and architecture studio. It will be responsible for every new project we undertake, and I want you to run it. I looked up, certain I had misheard him. What? I am offering you the position of Vice President of Design and Architecture for the Sterling Group, he said, as calmly as if he were ordering another coffee. You will report directly to me. You will build your own team. Your first project, of course, will be to take back control of the Sterling Tower and see your original vision through to completion. Properly this time, I was speechless. My mind was reeling, trying to process the sheer, stunning reversal of fortune. Vice President. My own division. Your salary, he continued, will be $300,000 a year, plus a significant completion bonus for the tower. The number was so astronomical, so far beyond the realm of my reality, I almost laughed. It was more than double what I was making. It was more than Arthur was making. He placed his business card on the table between us. It was heavy, made of thick, black cardstock, his name embossed in silver. That's my private cell number, he said. I'm not asking for an answer now. But our contract with Vance Designs will be officially terminated at the end of business on Friday. The door is open, Miss Lin. I hope you'll choose to walk through it. He stood up, gave me another brief, decisive nod, and walked out of the cafe, leaving me alone at the table with the business card and the smoking crater of my old life. I looked at the card, at the name, at the title he was offering me. It wasn't just a job. It was justice. It was vindication. It was the most elegant, perfect, and complete revenge I could have ever possibly imagined. I sat there for a long time, the rain streaming down the windows of the cafe. The feeling of being a victim, of being a helpless pawn in Arthur's pathetic games, was gone. And in its place was a feeling of immense, exhilarating power. My purgatory was over, and my reckoning was about to begin. It's Sunday evening, and the city of Chicago is settling into that quiet, melancholic pause before a new work week begins. From my window, I watch the L train glide past, a bright serpent of light in the twilight, its passengers anonymous figures heading toward their own unknown futures. It's strange to think how much can change in a weekend. A week ago, a Sunday evening like this was a time of deep, gnawing dread, of preparing my spirit for another 5 days of quiet humiliation. But the weekend after my meeting with Julian Croft was different. It was the calm, thrilling, and deeply satisfying quiet of a general planning a flawless victory. I was no longer a pawn in someone else's game. I was about to knock the king off the board. I did not spend the weekend agonizing over Julian Croft's offer. The decision had been made the moment he'd said the words vice president. My weekend was not about deliberation. It was about preparation for a strategic and orderly withdrawal. On Saturday, I drafted my resignation letter. It was a masterpiece of professional brevity, 2 sentences of cold, hard, and irrefutable fact. There were no emotional appeals, no lengthy explanations. It was a sterile legal instrument, as clean and as sharp as the edge of a steel I-beam. On Sunday evening, while Arthur was likely at his country club, lamenting the state of modern architecture, over a glass of overpriced scotch, I went to the office. The building was empty and silent, a concrete tomb. I walked through the quiet, darkened studio, a ghost visiting the scene of her own haunting. I went to my desk, my small, neat space in the open-plan bullpen, and I packed. I took the framed photo of my parents. I took the small, potted succulent I had somehow managed to keep alive. I took my personal architecture books, the ones with my notes in the margins. I packed my entire professional life at Advanced Designs into a single, small cardboard box. When I walked in tomorrow morning, I would be a visitor, a transient with no attachments to the place. I was ensuring there would be nothing to hold me hostage, no reason to stay a moment longer than I had to. Monday morning felt different. As I walked through the lobby of our building, I didn't feel the usual sense of dread. I felt a calm, humming sense of power. The office, which had always felt so intimidating, now seemed small, petty. The minimalist white walls felt not like a statement of high design, but like the padded walls of an asylum. Arthur was already in his glass-walled office, the door closed, speaking animatedly on the phone. He looked stressed. He had the hunted look of a man who knew he was in trouble, but didn't yet understand the scale of the impending disaster. I spent the morning at my now barren desk, methodically archiving my old project files and writing a detailed handover memo for the poor, unsuspecting junior who would be forced to take my place. I was a model employee right up to the very end. I was leaving no loose ends, no excuse for anyone to contact me after I was gone. I was making a clean break. At 11 o'clock, I sent Arthur a brief professional email. Subject: quick chat. The body read: Arthur, do you have 5 minutes to chat when you are free? His reply was instantaneous, a final petty exertion of his dominance. I can give you 2 minutes at 11:30. At exactly 11:30 a.m. I picked up the single folded piece of paper from my desk, my resignation letter, and walked towards his office. The other designers in the studio, sensing the gravity of the moment, fell silent, their eyes following me. They pretended to be working, but I could feel their gazes on my back. I had become the office's primary source of dramatic entertainment. I knocked once on his glass door and entered without waiting for a reply. He was sitting behind his enormous, empty desk, a picture of contrived importance. He didn't look up from his computer screen. "What is it, Maya?" he asked, his tone bored and irritated. "I'm very busy." I walked across the expensive rug and placed the folded letter in the center of his desk, directly in his line of sight. "This is for you," I said, my voice even. He finally looked up, first at the letter, then at me. He unfolded it with an air of theatrical weariness. He read the 2 sentences. "Please accept this as my formal resignation from Advanced Designs. My final day of employment will be in 2 weeks. The effect was immediate."
He stared at the paper, his mind clearly refusing to process it.
Then he looked at me, a slow, incredulous smile spreading across his face. He actually laughed. It was a short, barking, ugly sound. "Oh, Maya, don't be so dramatic," he said, leaning back in his chair, the picture of condescending amusement. "Is this about the conference call? I know I was hard on you." "Of course I was." You made a huge mistake that has put our biggest client at risk. That is how you learn. That is how this business works. You don't just throw away a promising career over a bruised ego. I just stood there, my expression perfectly neutral, letting him talk. I had imagined this moment, and I knew that my silence would be a far more effective weapon than any angry words. My decision is final. Arthur, I said quietly. The smile vanished from his face, replaced by a dark, ugly flush of anger. The condescension had failed. It was time for the tirade.
He stood up, his hands flat on his desk.
And leaned towards me. You are making the biggest mistake of your life, he snarled, his voice a low, furious hiss. You are nothing without this firm. I found you. I taught you everything you know. You think anyone in this city, he gestured wildly at the window, at the skyline, will hire you after the sterling screw-up? After you nearly sank this firm? I will see to it that you are blacklisted. I will call every principal I know. You will be lucky to find a job drafting bathroom renovations in the suburbs.
He was pacing now, a caged animal, his performance.
For the benefit of the audience of junior designers watching through the glass. You are ungrateful. After everything I've done for you, the opportunities I have given you. This is how you repay me, by running away at the first sign of trouble? You are disloyal. You are a coward. I let him run out of steam. I let the venomous, pathetic words fill the space between us. When he finally stopped, breathing heavily, his face red, I waited a beat. Are you finished? I asked, my voice still unnervingly calm. His eyes widened, shocked by my lack of a reaction. He had expected tears, pleading, anger. He was not prepared for my stillness. Where are you going, anyway?
He sneered, falling back into his chair, a final desperate attempt to regain control. Let me guess.
A position at Miller & Sons? A third-rate, strip mall firm that needs a new C.A.D. monkey to do their renderings. Is that the best you could do? This was the moment. The one I had been waiting for. The one I had replayed in my mind 100 times over the weekend. I looked him directly in the eye. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply delivered the fact, a clean, sterile, and utterly devastating piece of information. I've accepted the position of Vice President of Design and Architecture at the Sterling Group, I said. I'll be leading their new in-house division. I watched the words land. I watched as his brain processed the information, the name, the title. I saw the brief flicker of utter confusion in his eyes give way to a dawning catastrophic understanding. And then I saw the blood drain from his face. He went pale, a ghastly gray color. His mouth fell open slightly. His eyes, which had been full of so much fire and arrogance just a moment before, were now just wide, empty pools of pure animal horror. He connected the dots. I could see the frantic calculations happening behind his eyes. Julian Croft's silence. The project on hold, my resignation, my new job title. At his client's company. He understood, in that single, terrible, soul-crushing moment, that he had not just lost an employee. He had been outmaneuvered. He had been surgically dismantled. And he had personally handed the scalpel to the person who had done it. He just stared at me, speechless, his entire world collapsing in the silent, air-conditioned space of his beautiful office. He looked, for the first time since I had known him, completely and utterly defeated. And the sight of his ruin was the first sweet, satisfying taste of my victory. I stood up. I believe my 2 weeks are a formality at this point, I said, my voice still quiet. My personal belongings have already been removed. My project files are in order. My work here is finished. I turned and walked to the door. I did not look back at him. I did not need to. I could feel the weight of his shattered gaze on my back. I walked out of his office and through the open-plan studio. The other designers were staring, their faces a mixture of shock and a dawning, fearful respect. I walked to my desk, picked up the single, small cardboard box containing my life at that firm, and I walked towards the exit. I did not say goodbye to anyone. The elevator ride down felt like a slow, deliberate descent from purgatory to earth. I stepped out into the bustling lobby, walked through the revolving doors, and out into the bright, windy chaos of a Chicago afternoon. I took a deep, clean breath of city air. The resignation was complete. And the real revenge had just begun. It's Sunday evening, just past 8 o'clock. The city is a tapestry of light and shadow outside my window. I'm looking at the Sterling Tower, my tower. As it takes its place in the heavens, its double helix exoskeleton lit up in a soft, elegant white. It is a landmark. A piece of the history of this city. And it is a monument to the best revenge I could have ever imagined. Vengeance, I have learned, is not a fire that consumes you. True, lasting vengeance is a skyscraper. It is something you build, stone by stone, on the foundation of your own worth, until it is so tall and so brilliant that it casts a permanent shadow over the small, dark place where your enemies once stood. My 2 weeks' notice advance. Designs was a formality that lasted exactly 4 hours. After I walked out of his office, Arthur had apparently collapsed into a state of incoherent rage, followed by a frantic, panicked attempt at damage control. He had tried to call Julian Croft. His calls were not returned. By the end of the day, a junior HR representative had called me and informed me, in a nervous, stammering voice, that the firm had accepted my immediate resignation and that my final paycheck would be couriered to me. I was free. My first day at the Sterling Group was a study in contrasts. I walked not into a small, tense museum of a single man's ego, but into the thrumming, high-powered heart of a global development empire. The headquarters occupied the top 10 floors of a sleek, modern tower overlooking the Chicago River. My new office was a corner suite on the 52nd floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 sides. My name was already on the door in clean silver. Lettering, Maya Lin, Vice President, Design and Architecture. The title still felt like a dream. The atmosphere was one of quiet, lethal competence. People moved with purpose. My new assistant, a sharp, efficient young man named David, greeted me with a respectful "Good morning, Miss Lin," and a tablet containing my schedule for the day. There was no gossip, no whispered speculation. I was not the disgraced junior from a failing firm. I was a senior executive, and I was treated as such. It was a world where worth was measured not by who you knew, but by what you could do. At 10 o'clock, David informed me that Mr. Croft was ready for me in the main boardroom. I walked down the hall, my heart beating a steady, confident rhythm. I entered the room. It was a vast, impressive space, dominated by a single, enormous marble table. At the far end, in front of a panoramic window that framed the entire city skyline, sat Julian Croft. He was alone. "Maya," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him.
He had dropped the formal "Miss Lin. Welcome to Sterling."
"Thank you for this opportunity, Julian," I said, taking my seat. "Opportunity has nothing to do with it," he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. "I don't give opportunities. I make strategic investments. And I believe you are the best strategic investment I've made in a decade." He slid a piece of paper across the polished marble table. It was a copy of a letter, written on his official letterhead. To Mr. Arthur Vance, Principal, Vance Designs. Re. Termination of contract for the Sterling Tower project. Dear Mr. Vance, this letter serves as formal notification that the Sterling Group is hereby terminating our contract with Vance Designs for the Sterling Tower project, effective immediately. This decision is based on a complete and total loss of confidence in your firm's leadership, professional integrity, and oversight capabilities. I read the entire letter. It was a cold, brutal, and systematic demolition of Arthur's professional standing. It cited the foundation incident, his clear and willful disregard of his own architect's documented warnings, and his subsequent unprofessional attempt to deflect blame onto a junior employee. It was my entire vindication, written in the cold, unforgiving language of corporate law. "That was sent by courier to his office an hour ago," Julian said. "By now his lawyers are probably advising him to take a very long, very quiet vacation."
The
first half of my revenge was complete. Arthur had lost the biggest, most important contract of his career. I felt a grim, clean satisfaction. It was not a joyful feeling. It was the feeling of a debt being paid, of a balance sheet finally being corrected. "And that, of course, brings me to my next point," Julian said. He slid a second, much thicker, leather-bound document across the table towards me. Your first official project as vice president. I opened it. The cover page was a title I knew better than my own name. Professional Services. Agreement for the design and execution of the Sterling Tower. I flipped to the signature page. Under the client, Julian Croft had already signed. And on the line for lead architect, Sterling Group, was my name. Maya Lin. The budget has been increased by 15%, Julian said, as if commenting on the weather, to cover the costs of the foundation correction and to ensure there are no further compromises in quality. You have full creative and operational control. Your only directive is to build the exact brilliant building you designed in the first place. Build it for me. Build it for this city, and build it for yourself. I sat there, the heavy, important weight of the contract in my hands. I thought of Arthur, of his petty tyrannies, of his grand theft of my ideas. He had tried to steal my work, to make my masterpiece his own, but in his arrogance he had overplayed his hand. And now I was taking it all back. Not just the credit, not just the title. I was taking the building itself. It was the most complete, most elegant, and most devastatingly proportional revenge I could have ever imagined. It wasn't about watching him burn. It was about taking the fire he had tried to snuff out and using it to build a star. I spent the rest of the day in my new, magnificent office. At noon, a team from the legal department arrived with a large dolly stacked high with dozens of document boxes. They were all the files, plans, and communications related to the Sterling Tower. Now the legal property of the Sterling Group. My property, I found the large black portfolio containing the master blueprints, the ones I had personally printed and bound. I took them to the large drafting table that stood by the window. I untied the ribbon and unrolled the first sheet. My lines. My calculations, my vision, it was all there waiting for me. I was no longer a ghost in my own story. I was the author, the architect, the master of my own design. I thought of Arthur, sitting in his silent, museum-like office 3 blocks away, with a termination letter in his hand and a gaping, client-shaped hole in his future. I felt no pity for him. He had not been defeated by some grand emotional scheme.
He had been defeated by his own mediocrity, by his own insecurity.
He had been defeated by the simple, undeniable fact that talent, in the end, speaks for itself. You just have to be willing to give it a microphone. I picked up a pen. I looked out my window at the river, at the bridges, at the magnificent, sprawling, beautiful chaos of the Chicago skyline, the city that had inspired me, that had tested me, that had nearly broken me, and that was now finally mine to shape. A slow smile spread across my face. My work was not finished. My work had just begun. It's Sunday, just past 8 in the evening. The reflection of my office lights mingles with the glittering skyline in the window, making it hard to tell where my world ends and the city begins. My tower, the Sterling Tower, stands proud among them, its unique helix catching the last of the ambient light. It is a landmark, a testament to a battle won. But a victory, I've learned, is only the beginning of a story, not the end. The real measure of a person is not what they destroy, but what they choose to build in its place. The final act of my revenge on Arthur Vance had nothing to do with him at all. It took place 2 years after his fall in a quiet meeting with a nervous young architect who reminded me so much of myself. The 2 years following my arrival at the Sterling Group were a blur of intense, joyful, and relentless work. The Sterling Tower rose from the ashes of its troubled foundation, a project reborn under my complete control. My name was now spoken with respect in the boardrooms and on the construction sites of Chicago. I had built my own in-house design division from the ground up, handpicking a small, brilliant team of architects and designers who, like me, valued collaboration over ego. My leadership style was simple, the antithesis of everything I had learned from Arthur. I demanded excellence, but I gave credit. I challenged ideas, but I never belittled the person having them. I was determined to build a studio where talent could thrive in the light, not wither in the shadows. Arthur Vance, as a force in my life, had simply ceased to exist. His firm, having lost its flagship client and its only creative engine, had folded within a year of my departure. I heard through industry gossip that he had taken an early retirement, selling his magnificent apartment and moving to a quiet, unassuming town in Florida. He had not been blacklisted or publicly ruined in some grand, dramatic fashion.
He had
Simply quietly become irrelevant. And that, I found, was a far more fitting end. My focus was on the future, on the next project. Which brought me to Ben. Ben Carter was a junior architect I had hired straight out of graduate school. He was painfully shy, with a slight stutter and a habit of staring at his shoes when he spoke. But his mind was a supernova of creativity. His initial design sketches were the most innovative, most daring I had seen from anyone since my own early work. He was a diamond in the rough, a brilliant talent wrapped in a thick shell of insecurity. I saw myself in him, the Maya Lin who had stood silently by the wall praying someone would see her. And I saw in myself a terrifying echo of Arthur, a person in a position of immense power, with the ability to either cultivate that talent or crush it. We were in the early stages of a new project, a proposed museum of digital art. The brief was challenging, calling for a building that was both a physical space and an interactive digital medium. The senior team had been stuck, producing safe, uninspired concepts. One afternoon, Ben knocked tentatively on my office door. "Miss Lin, do you have a minute?" He stammered, clutching a roll of sketches to his chest like a shield. Of course, Ben. Come in, I said, gesturing to the chair opposite my desk. With trembling hands, he unrolled his sketches. They were breathtaking. He had designed a building based on the concept of a pixelated cloud, a structure made of thousands of programmable, light-emitting glass blocks, allowing the entire facade of the museum to become a constantly changing digital canvas. It was audacious, brilliant, and probably a logistical nightmare. It was perfect. "This is extraordinary, Ben," I said, my voice full of a genuine awe I hadn't felt in years. He blushed, staring at his shoes. "It's probably silly," he mumbled. "The senior team is going in a different direction. It's probably not practical." And in that moment, I heard the echo of Arthur's voice in my head. "It's a bit naive. Don't create problems where there are none." I saw the path Arthur would have taken. He would have praised the idea gently, then taken the sketches, refined them, and presented them to Julian Croft as a concept I've been developing. He would have absorbed the younger talent's idea into his own, leaving Ben with a pat on the head and a crushing sense of creative impotence. The temptation, a dark, ugly thing, flickered inside me for a split second. It would be so easy, but I was not Arthur Vance. My revenge, my true, final revenge, would be to become his absolute opposite. "It's not silly, Ben," I said, my voice firm and clear. "It's brilliant. And it is absolutely the direction we are going in, but it needs work. The engineering will be a challenge. The budget will be a war, but the concept? The concept is the cornerstone." I stood up. "Let's get to work. And I mean this is your vision. I am here to help you build it." For the next month, I became his mentor. We worked side by side, long into the evenings, just as I had once done alone. But this was different. I didn't take over. I guided, I asked questions, I challenged his assumptions. I pushed him to defend his choices. I taught him how to translate his raw, artistic vision into the practical language of engineering, budgets, and client presentations. I was giving him the tools not just to be a great designer, but to be a great architect, a leader. The day of the presentation to Julian Croft, and the board arrived. I had booked the main boardroom. Ben was a nervous wreck. "I can't do this, Miss Lin," he said to me outside the door, his face pale. "You should present it. They'll listen to you." "They will listen to you," I said, putting a hand on his shoulder, "because the idea is yours. It is strong. And you are the only one who can truly do it justice. I will be right there with you. Now take a deep breath and go show them what you've built." He walked into that room, and for the next hour I watched him. He stammered at first, but then he started talking about his design, and a transformation occurred. The shy, insecure boy vanished, and a confident, passionate architect took his place. He owned the room. He answered every question with a depth of knowledge and a passion that was utterly captivating. He was brilliant. When he finished, there was a moment of silence. And then the room erupted in a spontaneous round of applause, led by Julian Croft himself. The project was approved on the spot. Later that day, Julian came to my office. "That was a masterstroke, Maya," he said, sitting in the chair opposite me. "That young man is a prodigy. Finding him, cultivating that talent. That is a greater skill than just designing buildings yourself." "I had a good teacher," I said with a small smile. "He taught me everything about what not to do."
After
Julian left, I stood at my window looking out at the city. Ben had already gone home, no doubt to celebrate the greatest day of his professional life. The victory I felt in that moment was purer, deeper, and more satisfying than any victory I had ever known. It was not a victory over an enemy. It was the victory of a legacy. My revenge on Arthur Vance was never about the contract, the title, or the money. It was about the principle of the thing. It was about the simple, profound idea that talent deserves a voice, that creation deserves credit, that a person's work is their own. The greatest expression of that principle was not in taking back my tower, but in empowering a young architect to build his own. I looked at the Sterling Tower, my beautiful, defiant building, and I finally understood. It was not a monument to my revenge. It was a cornerstone. The first foundational piece of a new legacy, one built not on ego and theft, but on integrity, respect, and the simple, powerful act of lifting others up. And that, I knew, was a legacy that would stand much taller and last much longer than any building made of steel and glass.